Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. So today we're going to be covering the Guardian cards. These were used by Raphael within, I think it was either Series 3 of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! It was the Waking of the Dragon's arc. And Raphael was one of these who was under the control of darts. He was less of a pawn than most of them because they were a bit too young and impetuous. He was the older one of them and was able to kind of break the seal rather than having his soul immediately taken. However, he did, when he discovered that he was being played by darts since he was young, when he was a kid, that was the reason that he lost his friends and his family, and the reason that the wave crashed the boat and meant that he had to live on an island on his own without civilization. His life was ruined by darts. As a result, he became very angry, and because of that, his soul was then taken through those means. These cards are quite powerful. There were a few of them, like 2 or 3, that were more modern, and in doing so, they actually had to be either limited or banned because they were considered too powerful. They are a decent set of cards, but they are all reliant on the equip cards being out, which is why I've shown on here them spaced with their equips as well, because you can't have the monster without the equip being on field, which is the major downside to how these cards react. So we'll just cover them. The first is Guardian Elmer. This is a Wind Attribute Fairy type level 3 with 1300 attack and 1200 defense. It cannot be summoned unless you control a face-up Butterfly Dagger Elmer, and when this card is normal or special summoned, you can target one appropriate equip spell card in your graveyard and equip that target to this card. So it's an easy enough effect. It's able to equip itself from one of your equip spells in the graveyard, things like Power of the Guardian, Moon Mirror Shield. Those are 2 of the more powerful examples you've got. I'm sure there's others you can think of. I know most people will say, when I say Armed Changer, you will look at me thinking, what are you talking about? Since when is Armed Changer okay? It's a card which, basically, when it's equipped, if you destroy a monster, you're able to recover a monster from your graveyard with attack points equal to or less than that opponent's monster that you destroyed. And so you're constantly being able to refuel your hand, and then you could obviously just discard the cards again if you need it as cost for other effects. So the whole point is you're not overusing your hand, but it does come at the cost of having to constantly use and be reliant on that card. If they remove it, then that's the weakness to it. As for the spell card itself, the equip spell, it's called Butterfly Dagger Elmer. The effect is the equipped monster gains 300 attack. When this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard while equipped, you can return this card to the hand. Right, so the thing about this card is that it's a permanent 300 attack boost, so it might not seem as that big of a deal, and if it constantly gets destroyed, you can constantly re-equip it, which means it's constantly getting 300 attack points. You do that a number of times, and your particular monster becomes quite powerful over that time. Essentially, you don't want your opponent to really be destroying this. You would rather kind of destroy it yourself. It doesn't matter who takes it out, but if you're the one who's doing it, you've got the control, and you're able to sort that out yourself. And anything, and I always say this, if your opponent has control, you want to take that control away from them. You want to always be the one running the show. The next card is Guardian Bow. It's a Dark Attribute Fiend type level 4 with 800 attack and 400 defense. It cannot be summoned unless you control a face-up wicked breaking Flamberg Bow. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, it gains 1000 attack, and you negate the effects of monsters destroyed by battle with this card. Okay, so initially it's got 800 attack. There's nothing really that impressive about it, but actually the effect is really decent. 1000 attack points isn't, anything to laugh at. It's a decent stat boost by any means. It's essentially the same as adding an Axe of Despair to it every turn. Every time it destroys something, it's constantly getting bigger and more difficult to defeat. Of course, it doesn't have any protection in terms of effects, so it can be shut down from that point. And the other thing is, there are so many spell and trap cards out there, so many monster effects that just get rid of this card as well. But the other part of it is being able to lock out your opponent's monster effects when it destroys it by battle. Means that if they have kind of floating effects, they all get shut down. Interesting, this card has been seen within Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. It was in Season 3, and he was one of the servants for the Supreme King, who was Jane Yuki in his dark form. He wasn't loyal as one of the servants. In fact, when Jane lost his way after drawing with Axel Brody, he went back to being really scared of polarization and using any fusion cards from what he did as the Supreme King. That Guardian Bow actually challenged him to try and take his crown and to take his power. In doing this, he actually lost to Jaden. Even though Jaden was scared, he was able to kind of not have to fuse and use alternative ways to beat him. Also, I was going to say that the Wicked Breaking Flamberg spell card has also seen play without Guardian Bow as well. It was used in Season 2 of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX by an Obelisk Blue student. It was a first year named Richie, who was facing Chaz Princeton, and he equipped it. I think it was to... It was one of his warrior monsters. I can't remember the name of it now. But it was used as just a generic equip to it, and it made it quite powerful. Its effect is to send one card from your hand to the graveyard, then target one monster on the field. You equip this card to that target, it gains 500 attack, and you negate the effects of opponent's monsters destroyed by battle with the equipped monster. Essentially, it gets the same effect as what the Guardian version does. The only difference is that it can be used on any of your monsters, and of course you have the discard cost attached to it as well. It's not that big of a deal, and 500 points is okay. It's better the secondary part of the effect to be able to shut down your opponent's effects when they're destroyed in battle. The next card is Guardian Chaos. This is actually one of the cards we see used by Raphael, and she is constantly was on the island, was one of the cards that was broken and battered and seen a lot of, and it's one of his kind of preference cards. Guardian Chaos is a water attribute Sea Serpent level 4, 1000 attack and 1800 defense. It cannot be summoned unless you control a face-up Rod of Silence Chaos. This card is unaffected by spell effects and cannot be targeted for attacks, but does not prevent your opponent from attacking you directly. Okay, so this is one of the earliest iterations of that type of effect, where it cannot be attacked, but it doesn't stop your opponent from attacking you directly. It's quite good when paired with something like Spirit Barrier, because as long as you've got a monster on the field, basically they can go for as many direct attacks as they want. All that battle damage goes to 0, and that's the effect of Spirit Barrier. Being unaffected by spell effects is also quite decent, but with the number of monster effects that can be used to destroy this, as well as trap effects, or even just negating this effect entirely, means it has lost a lot of its power. Its spell card, Rod of Silence Chaos, it means that the equipped monster gains 500 defense. You negate other spell effects that target the equipped monster, and if you do, destroy that spell card. So this provides your monsters with spell immunity, but it provides them with a defensive boost rather than an attack boost, so it's a little bit like the opposite of the Wicked spell card, Wicked Breaking Flamberg, because this boosts the opposite stat. It's decent, but, you know, unless you're playing a defensive deck, it's really not that worthwhile. The next card is actually something Raphael didn't use. It's called Arsenal Summoner, but is also part of the Guardian archetype. It's a wind attribute spellcast at level 4 with 1600 attack and 1600 defense. Flip, its effect is add 1 Guardian card from your deck to your hand, except Celtic Guardian, Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress 1, Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress 2, Guardian of the Labyrinth, or the Reliable Guardian. So it searches for any of your Guardian cards. These could be either the spell cards, the equipped spells, or the monsters themselves, so that provides more consistency. It is quite annoying from its text for what it is, because there are a few cards that have that kind of naming to them, which mean they have to be specified so that you can't just search for anything. I don't know why they need the specifications, because none of the cards on that list, with the exceptions, is that good. The 2 Winged Dragon cards, I mean, one's 1400 attack, one's 1200 attack. Guardian of the Labyrinth I don't think is particularly powerful, and the Reliable Guardian, if I remember, it boosts your monsters by 700 defense. You know, not impressive, but it is what it is. Guardian Seal is a fire attribute pyro type level 4 with 1700 attack and 1400 defense. Its effect is it cannot be summoned unless you control a face-up shooting star bow seal. You can send 1 equipped spell card you control that is equipped to this card to the graveyard to target 1 monster your opponent controls and destroy that target. Now we're talking. This is one of the... It's still not one of the more powerful ones, and we'll come to those at the end. I've put them in a specific order in how I see these cards in terms of their power levels. It's still not that great. It is able to destroy one of your opponent's monsters, but destroying things aren't as good as sending things away, returning them to the hand, or sending them back to the deck. But it's an effect, and it's an old effect, so what can you do? Sending an equipped spell means it's a 1-for-1 effect, which means unless you're recovering it or your opponent's monster is a massive threat to you, you might not actually need to rely on the effect at all. The equipped spell, Shooting Starbow Seal, has the effect the equipped monster loses 1000 attack, but it can attack your opponent directly. This is quite a decent effect if you've got a powerful monster. Yes, it does lower their stat line up for the attack, but you know, if your opponent's on low life points anyway, this is more than enough to seal your opponent's fate. It's consistent for what it does, but is battle heavy and battle reliant. If your opponent has the necessary cards to get rid of this or your monster, then you're not going to be able to get the damage in either way. Now we're getting into some of the better cards. This is Guardian Trice. It's a level 5 light attribute thunder type monster. It's got 1900 attack and 1700 defense. It cannot be summoned unless you control a face-up twin swords of flashing light Trice. And when this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon the monster from the graveyard that was used for its tribute summon. So this is okay for, you know, it brings another monster back. It keeps your field presence, and depending on what you bring back, it's fine. You know, getting rid of this card means you're just bringing back the other. It's a bit of a trade-off, but it's still weak. It's not one of the strongest ones out there. The next card is Twin Swords of Flashing Light Trice. This is the equip spell. Send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard, equip this card to a monster. It loses 500 attack, but it can make a second attack during each battle phase. Now, remember what I was saying about that Shooting Starbow Seal? If you can get those 2 cards to work together, and you can boost your monster's attack points by a certain amount, more than the amount that you're decreasing by this effect, these effects anyway, by more than 1500, then you're going to be able to get that damage in a lot more consistently. Remember, Power of the Guardian lets you gain 500 attack each time that monster attacks, so you can offset this essentially within a couple of turns if you want to. So that's always a strategy. Now we're getting into the key cards here. This is Guardian Growl. It's a level 5 Earth attribute dinosaur type monster with 2500 attack and 1000 defense. It cannot be summoned unless you control a face-up gravity Axe Growl. If this is the only card in your hand, you can special summon it from your hand. This reminds me a little bit of something like Swift Gaia the Fierce Knight. It's that same standard type of effect. Slightly stronger, it's got 2500 versus Gaia that has 2300, and it's okay as an effect, but you know, it's still quite mediocre. And here is the Gravity Axe Growl. The equipped monster gains 500 attack, and monsters your opponent controls cannot change their battle positions. This is useful if your opponent is playing flip-based decks and flip-based effects, or are trying to do things to kind of protect themselves. If they're on the back foot, they can't change the battle positions. If you've already got this on the field and then you're able to then equip to Growl, that's even better, because that makes it a 3000 attack monster. Okay, so now we're getting to the kind of his versions of the boss monsters. The first is Guardian Iatus. It's a wind attribute fairy type level 8 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. The effect: if you have no monsters in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can send one of your equipped spells equipped to this card to the graveyard, then target up to 3 monsters in your opponent's graveyard, banish those targets, and if you do, this card gains 500 attack for each monster banished by this effect until the end of this turn. That's quite a decent effect for it. It does rely on you having no monsters in your graveyard, but that's very much how Raphael played. It's not really to speak about him using banished cards, but he considered all of his cards to be precious. That's why he always kept even the really faded copies of the Guardians that he had when he was deserted on that desert island. He made sure to look after them, and this was probably his greatest monster at the time, his greatest saviour to protect himself. Being able to banish your opponent's monsters is decent because you're able to get rid of certain things that they might be setting up for, and obviously, unless they're running a banished style of deck, and that means they're not being able to recover them. This becomes a 4000 attack monster as a result, even if it is only for until the end of the turn. And of course, being able to be just instantly special summoned means you've already got your normal summon as well. Alternatively, you can have gone through the banish route where you could have banished your other cards to then have no monsters in your graveyard and then special summon this. But it's kind of a balancing act from it. And then we've got the equip spell. This is Celestial Sword Iatus. This card is also treated as a Noble Arms card, which is very interesting, so it works with that archetype as well. The equipped monster gains 500 attack, and when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target one Guardian Iatus you control. It gains 500 attack for each banished monster. So this makes the attack that it would have gotten from its own effect more of a permanent effect. So anything that it's banished in the past, it gets that to become a 4500 attack monster if you consider the 3 monsters plus the boost of this 500 attack points as well. If you've banished various other cards as well, various other monsters, you're then able to benefit from that effect as well. I don't know which cards kind of pair with this outside of some generic banish cards. I was thinking maybe you could splash between the Guardians and the Valkyries. They have a similar kind of mythology to them, and they do rely on the Valkyrie side to do some banishing. But I think with the amount of support they have, it would have to be a case of splashing Guardian Iatus itself into a Valkyrie-style deck, rather than mixing Guardians and Valkyries, otherwise they would become too confusing and too mixed up. And this is the final set of cards. This card was actually introduced by Raphael from darts. Essentially, he was asked to walk to a graveyard and to continue to follow and dig the card up. He had to go quite a ways down to find this card, and actually it became his boss monster. Its power overwhelmed and shut out Guardian Iatus, and it it took away from Guardian Iatus' power and kind of sealed it away from being his true monster to being the darker form of himself. This was a gift from Darts. It's called Guardian Dreadscythe. It's a level 8 Dark Attribute Fiend type monster with 2,500 attack and 2,000 defense. Its effect is it cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned by its own effect. If a Guardian Iatus is destroyed by a battle or card effect and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. When this card is special summoned, you can equip one Reaper Scythe Dreadscythe from your deck to this card. You cannot normal summon or special summon monsters, but you can normal set. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, send one card from your hand to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon this card from your graveyard. So this is meant to work as a defensive response to if your Iatus is destroyed. Of course, being able to summon itself by just meeting that condition means it's quite easy to summon, and it gets its equip card straight from the deck, so you don't have to draw into it, you don't have to search for it. It gains those effects of that card as well without having to do anything which risks you drawing into kind of useless cards. And its ability to revive itself from the graveyard means it can continue to equip more of the Dreadscythes, because it's just a case of when the card is special summoned, so it can keep using that effect, making it incredibly powerful. And of course, the last card is Reaper Scythe Dreadscythe. It's the equip card for it with the effect equip only to Guardian Dreadscythe. It gains 500 attack for each monster in the graveyards. This is what makes the deck incredibly powerful. First, I can see why it's only equipped to Guardian Dreadscythe. It would be too powerful if it was a generic card. Most of all the other Guardian cards are very generic, and they can be used with pretty much anything. And very unlike the other cards, this is equipped straight to the monster, and that monster can be out first. With the other cards, they have to be out first before you can summon the various monsters, and then to get those effects again, then you'd have to equip like a second version or switch the target of that equip card to that specific monster to get that effect. This is really devastating and can be used for OTKs. It is inconsistent with how Guardian Iatus works, and works a little bit as an opposite. Iatus likes to have those cards banished. Dreadscythe prefers them relaxing and chilling in the graveyards, which is quite useful because it affects both graveyards. If you've got 5 cards in your graveyard and they've got 5 monsters in their graveyard, this card's becoming a 7,500 attack monster. Over time it can become that much more devastating. Of course, it is susceptible to all types of, battle problems, being destroyed by card effects more likely than battle. But they all have their own downsides. I love the designs of these cards, and I'm so glad that they were made. I'd love to see, if not in Lightning Overdrive, or maybe one of the future sets, for them to get like a revamped version, just to make them a little bit more relevant. I know Konami has been making some tough decisions over archetypes that do deserve this treatment, but I definitely see this being one of them. So make sure, whatever you do, like the video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to support the charity